Hello and welcome to the Temple Mount Podcast. I am Shogun. Joining me today for, I believe, only the second time in our illustrious history is my good friend Discord's Watson. And we are going to talk about one of my absolute favorite subjects, which is the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the lore of Warhammer 40,000. And today we're going to get into what you might call conspiracy theories about the Warhammer 40,000 timeline and theories about what might happen in the future of this evolving and incredibly rich, dark, terrifying, and fantastic universe. And if anybody is not familiar with the Warhammer 40,000 universe, you really should be. We have a channel on the server called Warhammer 40,000. Check that out. Check out our past 3 episodes on the lore of Warhammer 40,000 from the Roundtable podcast. I'll post those later. But before we jump into this, make sure you've joined the Temple Mount Discord server and make sure you've subscribed to our YouTube channel. There's awesome new episodes being uploaded every single day, and you're not going to want to miss that. That being said, welcome, Discord's Watson. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm great. And honestly, I can't wait to talk about 40K. I'm excited.
Me too, dude. People know I can talk Warhammer 40,000 literally forever. NSA coined the term Warhammer psychosis, and I loved it. So he's like, "Oh, you're in Warhammer psychosis," and I thought, "Man, that's perfect." And I made that the name of a show. So I guess you could call this Warhammer Psychosis Episode 2. And I mean, I'll just get it out there. I honestly believe that the Warhammer, I'm a crazy person, right? Everybody knows that. But I honestly believe the Warhammer 40,000 universe is more than fiction. I use the term, it's mythology, it's theology, it's prophecy, and it may even be history. But whether you take that seriously or not, I mean, it needs to be pointed out, Warhammer 40,000, unlike Harry Potter, unlike The Lord of the Rings or Dune or any of these other fantastic universes, is not written by any one singular author. You can't say, oh, this person or that person wrote it or made it up. It's sort of emerged out of the ether, and all these people contribute to it, and all these people kind of live in it mentally. And it evolves. It's an ever-evolving timeline, but there's no one person who's quote-unquote at the wheel of it, which in my opinion means that it's sort of like a dispensation or like a modern, I mean, I wouldn't be blasphemous and call it like a modern scripture, but in some sense it kind of is, right? It's like our modern mythology. Every culture, every history has created its own mythology and added to the symbolic history of humanity. And I would say that Warhammer 40,000 is what we can hold up with, like Homer's Iliad, or any of the cultural, the poetic Edda, or like any of the contributions of the past. Like in the future, they're going to remember Warhammer 40,000 and they'll study it the same way that we study like the Epic of Gilgamesh. You know what I mean? That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and you can even argue that the Codex Astartes is like the 10 Commandments or something similar. It's a decree.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you know, I'm a very convicted Christian, and what I've realized is there is no contradiction whatsoever between my Christian faith and the ecclesiarchal imperial creed of Warhammer 40,000. All of the beliefs are the same, right? There is a God Emperor, that would be Jesus Christ, or El Elyon, the God of heaven and earth. There is a space empire, which is what we call the kingdom of heaven. There is an adversary, the archenemy, Satan, chaos. There is the risk of damnation and temptation, right? Corruption. That's all in Christianity. There are holy and unholy beings. There is a final battle. There is power and faith. And the creed says the emperor protects, right? And God is my shield, right? Who shall I be afraid of? The Lord is with me. Like, in other words, it's actually the same, right? And so I don't want to like go too long before we dive into what we have to talk about, but like I have a theory of sorts that the end of the Bible is the beginning of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, because in the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, Earth, or Terra, is unified by the God Emperor, and that's how the Bible ends. The war, there's a war, the reunification war is described in the Book of Revelation. The God Emperor comes in the clouds. He comes in from space, which is what all these planets that get brought into the fold of the Imperium experience, that this God Emperor comes in the clouds. He comes from heaven. He makes everybody bend the knee to him and confess. Every tongue shall confess and every knee shall bow and confess that Jesus is Lord. That's what the God Emperor does. the kingdom of heaven comes on earth. You see what I'm saying? Like, and then from that point on, like, it's like either the Great Crusade launches from the planet we live on after Jesus unifies it, or we're actually already one of these outlying colonies, and the God Emperor will come and bring us back into the fold of the kingdom of heaven. Either way, it works, and either way, it dovetails perfectly from the end of the Bible to the beginning of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline. And that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the beginning of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, because we've covered that in the past. And again, you're talking about 40,000 years of history. So we're talking about the present of the future. So in the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, it's generally agreed to be about M42, meaning the 42nd millennium, the year 42,000. But there's some dispute. There could be like a few thousand years in the past or the future, because time itself is like all warped. But I want to talk to you basically like what we were talking about earlier about where we see the future of the timeline going. I know that you lean towards chaos and the victory of chaos, from what I've heard. Is that kind of correct? Like, you generally think chaos is in the upper hand?
Right now, yeah, I believe so. Yeah. I believe that all organic life is tied to chaos, and that they're like one and the same, pretty much. Like you can't get rid of one without the other. Like they can't coexist either. So I don't know what the compromise would be.
Right. And to clarify, it's not necessarily that all organic life is tied to chaos, although generally speaking, that's true. But there's, for example, the concept that the Tau, at least in the older lore, is sort of psychically blank. Like they're kind of impervious to chaos. There hasn't been any Tau corrupted by chaos. And the idea is that they don't really have a connection to the warp. But I think that's been kind of changed, or it's beginning to change as the timeline goes on. And there's other exceptions too, like the Tyranids, who are also organic, but they're like insect-like super predators, colony super predators. But they have a spiritual presence, a very powerful one called the Shadow and the Warp, and yet they're not susceptible to chaos corruption in any way. And so I guess I would kind of challenge what you're saying in that there are some exceptions that we could point to of organic beings who are, in a sense, not susceptible to chaos or even possibly antithetical to it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I can agree with that.
And
But
for
let me ask something. What would happen if chaos weakened like the Imperium to a point to where the Tyranids were no longer interested because they're at such a weak state that their power, their biomass is just like irrelevant. So, like, let's say they move on. What would happen?
if chaos weakened the Tyranids, is that what you said?
No, no, no. If chaos weakened the Imperium to a point where the Tyranids were no longer interested.
Well, right. So what could happen is chaos kind of corrupts things. That's what chaos does. It
Yeah,
corrupts
because
everything.
the Tyranids are not gonna, they're not gonna mess with chaos. They're not gonna waste their time with chaos. They're just gonna go do more important things. And they can't mess with the Necrons because they're living metal, and that's not really biomass. It's more automaton than anything, so it's like basically a robot.
Well, that's right. So the Tyranids are not going to get anything out of chaos or the Necrons, because what they want is food. They want biomass. And again, chaos corrupts,
Exactly.
and they don't want to eat things that have been corrupted by chaos. It's kind of like if they're like a scab. Well, what would be an example? They're kind of like honeybees, and if the flower is all rotten, they can't get like pollen from it. So the food that they want is spoiled. But it has been shown that they don't ignore chaos. They actually have begun to take an active interest in fighting against chaos, which is, in my opinion, one of the most sort of important or interesting parts of the timeline. Is that the Tyranids have evolved a separate hive fleet called Hive Fleet Tiamat, and Hive Fleet Tiamat is specifically evolved to be an anti-chaos hive fleet. And so they literally go out of their way to invade and destroy demon worlds that are corrupted by chaos and to fight demons. And they have evolved some of their capacities to be anti-chaos. I don't know all the details of this, right? But the Tyranids can essentially evolve organisms for any purpose. And they've already consumed, for example, pariahs, right? They've consumed, for example, like Calexis assassins who are psychic blanks. And psychic blanks have like a very rare mutation which is antithetical to chaos. So, like the Sisters of Silence have this power, or the Calexis assassins, and the Tyranids have eaten at least a few of both. And so that means the Hive Fleet is capable of evolving blanks, right? And blanks are kind of like they close the door of chaos wherever they go. So I envision, and it's already been sort of confirmed in the lore, that the Tyranids, they're in this galaxy. They came all the way here. They want to eat this galaxy. For them, it's not a good situation to just go, oh shit, this galaxy is screwed up. We're going to go to the next one, because it takes them forever to go from galaxy to galaxy, and they're hungry.
Yeah, right. Because they spent countless eons traveling in the void, quote unquote.
Right. So if you look at it this way, they've been looking at a refrigerator for countless eons, just hungry, 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 hungry. And they
So
finally
they're basically in the same position. Sorry to interrupt you. They're basically in the same position as the Necrons, but with a different context.
That's right. So both the Necrons and the Tyranids are in the same position, which is that they both want to lay claim to the galaxy. The Necrons see the galaxy as their legitimate sovereign domain. They're like, this is our galaxy. We own it. It belongs to us. We just happen to be asleep. It's like if you were sleeping for a month or even overnight and you woke up and a bunch of other people had moved into your house and were just living in your house. You'd be like, what the hell? This is my house. I'm going to get these people out of here. This house belongs to me. That's how the Necrons see it. The Tyranids are just predators. So, like, this is my food. They get to the refrigerator and they realize that something else is like rottening their food. They're gonna spray that with disinfectant. They're gonna if there's mice in the fridge eating all the food, they're gonna kill those mice. And so, from the point of view of the Tyranids, chaos is like mice. Like the chaos itself is not their food, but the chaos is eating their food, and they're quite capable of saying, "Well, shit. If we want to eat all this food, we've got to deal with this chaos thing." And the hive mind is so intelligent that it's actually capable of evolving and dealing with chaos in a way that, to be honest, it's unique. Like it's a toss up of who's a better anti-chaos force, the Tyranids or the Necrons, because in a certain way they're both perfect antithesis to chaos, which is why I kind of disagree with you quite a lot. Chaos, like a lot of people think, oh my god, it's like the forces of hell. It corrupts anything it touches. If you try and fight it, you only make it stronger, and that's all true. But really, chaos is kind of going to get its shit kicked in now, because if you look at it, the Imperium alone has been basically holding chaos at bay and defeating 12 Black Crusades in a row, right? Just the humans. But now
Well,
they have
I hate to say it, that's true. That's true. Because the most recent attempt by one of the Chaos Gods, the Plague Wars, was a complete and utter failure, bro.
Well,
As
everything that
soon
chaos
as Gilliman showed up with the reinforcements, it was ogre, dude. All ogre.
Well, that's right. So chaos looks scary, and it is scary. It's terrifying, right? Demons and black magic and sorcerous beings and greater demons. Like, it's insane. It's hell itself, the force of hell. But simple humans, right? Meat sack humans with laser rifles and flak jackets have been defeating 12 Black Crusades in a row. And I think I've read it before. Like, I'll post it again. It's like this super inspiring quote. It might take me a second to find it, but basically 12 Black Crusades in a row. Like, the forces of hell have vomited forth everything that they had. And just simple humans, weak, fallible humans, have defeated 12 Black Crusades in a row. The Siege of Terra was defeated. And now they have to deal with the humans and the Necrons and the Tyranids and the Tau and the Eldar Resurgent and the Eldar United. So it's like, I really feel like chaos blew their load, right? It was made to look like, oh my God, it's the end. Like, the Cicatrix Maledictum opened, the Cadian Gate was destroyed. Now it's just a matter of time. I look at it the opposite. I feel like, that was the nod. Like, you have to make it look, in any movie, if the good guy just kicks the bad guy's ass, it's not a very good movie. You need to make it like, oh man, like in a boxing fight, Rocky gets the shit kicked out of him for 4 rounds, and then he musters at the end and he knocks the bad guy out in the final round, right? That's basically what I think is going to happen here. And I just have to read this, right? Because it's so great. There's an Imperial Guardsman in the general chat says, "You would laugh, monster. But let me remind you, within that weak sack of meat and bone, uncared for by his God and wept for by none, beats a heart, a human heart that carries with it the strength and courage of all mankind. Within that sack of meat, festooned in thin armor and weapons only powerful in numbers, beats the heart of a man. And for 10,000 years, the hearts of men have beaten strongly in defiance of your so called ruinous powers. For 10,000 years, the hearts of men have stood united against a galaxy that despises them for no reason save that they had the audacity not to lay down and die. For 10,000 years, your black crusades have been pushed back, beaten down, and made a mockery of by weak sacks of flesh with cheap weapons and disposable equipment. For that weak sack of flesh that you so gleefully mock is no super soldier, no immortal warrior, no creature cursed by chaos like you. He is a man, an imperial guardsman drawn from some forgotten corner of the Imperium to fight for his species and for the safety of the people he loves. He is a factory worker, a farmer, a storekeeper, a father, a brother, a son, a mere man. And against creatures like you, teeming and numberless, powered by the very wills of thirsting gods, he holds the line. He has held the line for 10,000 years. So what is your excuse, monster? Is a pretty great quote, in my opinion.
Oh man.
So, if the Imperium has been standing and now the Tyranids are on the scene, and the Tyranids are bad news for everybody, right, basically, but they're actually kind of good news in the sense that they're a good counter to Chaos and the Necrons as well. So anyways, I've been talking too much. I want to kind of ask you now, if you were to write the next chapter of the timeline, right, say they hired you either to predict what was going to happen or to decide what was going to happen, what would you write into the next chapter, from where we are now? What do you think, if you had to, predict what the next season of the show is going to entail? What are some of your guesses?
I see the Necrons teaming up with the Imperium because the Necrons are ultimately looking for living bodies, if that makes sense. Because they don't want to necessarily become human, but they want to become what they were before when they were the Necrontyrs. And if that means teaming up with the Imperium to get a technology to create your own, gene seed or, organic gene seed or something like that to transfer your consciousness back into a living body, then so be it. And hold on, let me add one more thing. And the Imperium of Man has somehow managed to become stronger without the Emperor dying. Like, it's crazy. Like, failed invasion of Terra, then the Codex Astartes, like, basically keeps everything together. And while Robute Guilliman gathers everything and then reinforces all the sectors, while the Great Rift caused all this chaos, like somehow they managed to do it. Like Chaos played almost all their cards. I wouldn't say they played all their cards, but they played almost all their cards. They took the first shot, but I think they underestimated the Imperium's strength.
They definitely did. And also, I think it needs to be pointed out that the Imperium's strength, I don't think, has even begun to manifest. Like, the Imperium that has been kicking Chaos's ass for 10,000 years is actually the
Right, because it's
weakest.
been split in two.
Well, right, but the Imperium up till now is actually much weaker than the Imperium now, and I'll get into why. And the Imperium is only getting stronger now in profound ways. But before we move on to that, you said something very interesting that has never occurred to me before. So first of all, I completely agree with you that what's going to happen is the Necrons are going to team up with the Imperium, and actually that's already happened in the lore. So I have been obsessed. You've probably seen me. I go into the audiobook listening channel and I just listen to Warhammer 40,000 audiobooks all night. I put them on when I go to bed and I listen to them when I wake up. They're still going. So I'm listening to them while I'm sleeping
Well,
as well
they
as.
are very intelligent. The higher lords or the dynasties of the Necrons are very intelligent and they got the best of the best. It was only the common people that got the remains.
Right. That's right. So the more advanced Necrons actually still preserve some of their souls, if you want to call it that. They're not
Exactly.
automatons.
They still have consciousness.
They have sentience, they have consciousness. But the thing you said that was interesting is that they're going to team up for the purposes of regaining their humanity somehow, or regaining their spirituality or their essence that was lost in the bargain of soul transference. That's never occurred to me before. Because the angle that I saw is like they both have a common enemy. Not they both have two common enemies: chaos and the Tyranids, right? And the expression is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And the Necrons, unlike the Tyranids and unlike Chaos, they're not in any way incapable or incapable of allying with someone for convenience. Like they're both political entities, equivalent to like Germany and France. Germany and France may be rivals, but they can. I mean, bad example because they were on different, but like they can team up, right, against a third party enemy. But it never occurred to me that they might do so for the purposes of trying to, regain their humanity or their Necron tier. Humanity is the wrong word, right? Because they were never humans. That's an interesting concept that I didn't think of before.
Yeah, they were organic, but they weren't human.
Right, and I'm not sure how that would work, like how teaming up with humans would somehow allow them to regain their souls or their physicality, but it certainly seems possible that that could be the case.
They look at the Space Marines and they realize that humans have basically perfected gene editing technology, like CRISPR and stuff like that. So I mean, CRISPR would be our equivalent, basically. Like, we're on the precipice of what it could be in 50 years. Like, like what 40K is giving is an example of what it could be.
Well, right. And I mean, that's one of the things that, like, I know people will go, oh my God, you're crazy. You think Warhammer 40 is this ridiculous science fiction space opera and you think it's going to be real or could be real. It's like, yeah, dude, like everything in this is prophetic. Like, that's why I say it's prophecy or it's
Well, the
history or it's
concept of a super soldier warrior class isn't really fiction, it's not really science fiction. It's something that governments actually work on.
Absolutely. And we're just in the infancy of it now. And it's been worked on for thousands of years in a way, right? There's always been warrior casts, the Spartans, trying to figure out psychologically, mentally, emotionally, conditioning. How do you make the ultimate warrior? And now, of course, we have CRISPR and gene editing is just starting. So, yeah, if time goes on, there will be, 7 foot tall. So, like the Spartans from Halo are another example, but the Spartans are like a much less advanced stage of the evolution of the concept, right? A space marine blows a Spartan out of the water. Some people don't know that, but they just don't know their lore. They think a Spartan is like equal to a space marine. It's not even close, in my opinion.
Man, a Spartan doesn't even compare because a space marine has faith. And it's like, bro, the Emperor, Big E, when he's like generous, bro, space marines can do some work.
Well, that's right. And, that's where my Christian faith ties in perfectly to my fanatical. Like, I am fanatically loyal to the God Emperor of mankind and to the God Emperor of the universe. And to me, there's no difference between them. It's like El Elyon, the God Emperor. Like, God Emperor, that's why we call him Lord God. Lord means like emperor, it means like king. God means God. So, Lord God is God Emperor. And like in the Bible, it literally says commander of heaven's armies, commander of the starry hosts of heaven. So literally commander of the space army. It's the God Emperor, right? He's a man, but he's a god, and he's the leader of all these armies. And then you got to think, well, what is he fighting against, right? So people think God is this like, and I don't want to go into, we talk religion here all the time. We're trying, but you can't separate them. That's the point. So obviously, if God in the Bible is commander of heaven's armies, then there must be something for his armies to fight against, right? There's many things.
And 40K universe is a scary place, dude. I'd hate to refuel a ship because from what I was reading, they don't make it back.
Well, yeah, it's like one of the crazy things that people have to like.
It's like even refueling a ship in the 40K universe costs lives. Like that's how intense and brutal it's become.
Yeah, exactly. And so oh shit, there's so much to talk about. Yeah, it's a dark age, and here's the thing, right? So you'd think, well, things are getting worse for the Imperium, right? It started out in a strong state in the Great Crusade, and then it's degenerated and deteriorated over time, and now it's on its last legs. In reality, the opposite is true, because the Imperium has always been like unfathomably powerful, right? Even according to the lore, it's still the most powerful and most numerous faction, except for the orcs, but the orcs don't count because the orcs aren't united, right? So the Imperium is the biggest, most powerful, most numerous united faction. And that's true even arguably of the Tyranids, at least until that more of them arrive. But for now, Imperium is the most powerful. But the reason the Imperium has not been able to win is because it's a bloated bureaucracy. It's ridiculously inefficient. It's bogged down by superstition and ritual and ignorance and all this stuff. But now with you call it Gurlaman, Robot Guilaman or Robote Gulaman, right? So the weirdest name in 40k, nobody knows how to say it. Like one of the most important characters, and nobody knows how to say his name. I say Robot Guilaman. I don't even know how I say it. Robot Guilaman. How do you say it? For goodness sake, like.
Bro, I don't even know. His name doesn't make any sense.
He's like the most important character in the lore, and nobody can pronounce his name, which I love it, actually. I'd say Robote Guilaman, I guess. And I got to look into, like, there must be some origin to that name. But anyways, he is literally the greatest of all the Primarchs who could possibly have come back, with only one possible exception. Sanguinus is dead, so he doesn't count. Sanguinus would be a possible alternative. The only other alternative is Rogel Dorn. So, like, out of the three best Primarchs that could possibly have come back, it would basically be a toss-up between Robot Guilaman, Rogel Dorn, and Sanguinus. And arguably, not even really arguably, I'd say Robot Guilaman is the best of all the possible Primarchs who could have come back to life or been resurrected or still be alive. And so now, you've heard the expression, better an army of donkeys led by a lion than an army of lions led by a donkey. Well, essentially what we've had up till now was like an army of donkeys led by a donkey, arguably, but really it was like what we've had is basically an army of lions led by a donkey, because the lions are the Space Marines, right? They have these incredibly powerful Space Marines and Custodes and superhumans of all kinds, but they've all been led by the Council of Terra, the 12 High Lords of Terra, who are like venal, corrupt, they're obviously highly capable and like powerful people, but they're humans and they're not united, and they're bound by politics and self-interest. And so
you could argue that it's like that it's similar to a parliament, or even like like Congress. You could argue that it's similar to something like that, like more advanced. Like it's a technocracy, obviously, but would you consider it to be an oligarchy too? Because it's not very large either.
Well, it's pretty hard it's actually a super interesting question to clarify or classify what that governmental system is. So in one sense, I would actually say it's a meritocracy, but on the other hand, it's the farthest thing from a meritocracy, because like things like nepotism and bloodline and aristocracy and family line is hugely important, right? So you have to be from the right family, the right bloodlines, and all these different things. But at the end of the day, you're talking about people who are capable of rising to and staying at the top of an empire of trillions of people. So they are the most formidable. Like, I remember reading a quote, and I can't bring it up because I don't remember where it was from, but it's kind of going on about, like, yes, these people are corrupt and, like, distant and not really worthy of their power. But on the other hand, these people are not like petty bureaucrats. These people are like sharks in the shark tank. Like, they're insanely competent in their own way. But yeah, what is it? It's basically an aristocracy, right? So everything in 40k is based on like nobles and bloodlines. The Space Marines are different because they can be drawn from feral worlds, and like anyone who's badass enough can be a Space Marine. But the Imperial Knights, the Navis Nobilite, the Navigators, and the High Lords, like it's a caste system or a class system. It's basically based on the feudal system of the past with like dukes and barons and bloodlines and stuff. So I'd basically say it's an aristocracy is essentially what it is, in my opinion, or what it's supposed to be. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that because that's pretty much how it's always been for humanity. Excuse me.
Yeah, there's great families and bloodlines and so on and so forth. Now,
Yeah, you'll have like a strong ruler, and then you'll have the aristocracy, and then you'll have like the above average, and then you'll have like the masses or the common folk or the peasant.
right. And yet, at the end of the day, they have been humanity's Achilles heel is bureaucracy, self interest, nepotism, corruption. Now, what I'm getting at is now all of a sudden, all of that has been replaced, right? And there was something called the Hexarchy crisis, which was when Robot Wheelaman came back. The High Lords basically tried to rebel against him because they said, oh shit, this is going to undermine our power enormously. We're going to be subordinated to Robote. So even though it was the best thing that could have happened to humanity, human nature being what it is, they wanted to get rid of him for their own self interest. But him being a literal demigod, he outplayed them and he cleansed the senatorium or whatever and got rid of, he cut out the corruption. Basically, obviously there's still massive corruption, but he cut out a large amount of the corruption from the Imperium. And now there is, as you've seen, right, in the round table and here, whenever you try and have groups of people try and coordinate or control something, it doesn't really work very well. It's very inefficient. People betray each other, they backstab each other. There's politics, there's infighting, there's backstabbing. But when you have a benevolent authoritarian dictatorship, that is by far the most efficient and responsive and effective system for responding to external and internal threats. And that is Robote Guilliman par excellence. So, short of the emperor himself coming back to life, Robote Guilliman is the next best thing to the literal god emperor being back. And the
Well, he
indomitable.
played he, here. Let me add something. He played it so well because it's like you're not gonna disobey orders from Big E, right? Like especially the Inquisition, and the Inquisition is a large part of the Imperium's current state because it put the Imperium in a state of paranoia. It created that bureaucracy that we see now, and even though Guilliman is working on it, and he's done a pretty fantastic job so far. Like so far, he's managed. They haven't reestablished the Astronomicon in the northern sector of the Imperium, but the southern sector is still intact, and I think that's pivotal because they can send all the reinforcements they need until they figure it out. But I want to get back to what we are talking about. I think the Inquisition is the reason why the Imperium fell to such a miserable state.
Well, that's a very interesting claim, and I would love to hear you elaborate on why you feel that way.
Because I feel like it's like if I were to compare it to a real life example, it's kind of similar to the Jesuits. It's like they started infiltrating institutions, and then they slowly established control, and it's like they're using faith to propagate their control, and it's like I mean it's literally a cult. I mean, come on, it's literally a cult, and the corruption is insane. Like they they butt heads with the Space Marines all the time. And what can the Space Marines do? It's like why are you gonna fight your own people over stupid shit? And that's basically what the Inquisition does. It's like I'm not gonna compare them to the Spanish Inquisition, but they're definitely not good for humanity or the Imperium.
Well, so here we have to disagree. Um, so I agree with you. They have absolute power, right? There's absolute power, and the problem with it is there's factions, and the factions even fight amongst themselves. There's the radicals, and the mono dominants, and all these different factions of them, and they even fight amongst themselves. And yeah, there's been some absurd things like when the Space Wolves fought against the Inquisition, or the Inquisition is always sniffing at the heels of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, and because correctly so, right? They're looking out for the threat of mutation. Well, the Space Wolves are mutants, the Blood Angels are mutants. they're looking for the threat of heresy. Well, the Dark Angels did fall to chaos, some of them, right? So they're legitimately concerned because they were, the psyche of humanity is eternally scarred by the Horus heresy, right? If Horus could fall, the Emperor's favorite son, then how can they trust the space wolves, who are literally werewolves? Or how can they trust the blood angels, who are literally vampires? Or how can they trust the dark angels, who are literally keeping secrets? Right. So it makes sense why they don't trust the Space Marines, because, geez, half the Space Marines already fell to chaos. The Space Marines, as much as they're humanity's greatest heroes, they have a fucking terrible track record, right? Imagine if there's a 50-50 chance that someone's going to be turn against you. That's not very good odds to rely on, right? So it does make sense why they are not trusting them, but it's also hugely inefficient. And yeah, it's like, how do you have a system where you have multiple godlike powers all fighting against each other and against external threats? But I totally have to disagree that they are inherently bad, right? Because at the end of the day, like, the Inquisition is, it's, I guess, the equivalent you could kind of use in the modern world is the CIA. And that's where I would agree with you, right? It always seems to us the CIA is doing more harm than good. But then again, we never know that it's a true fact. They say you only hear about our failures, you'll never hear about our successes, right? Because by definition, if you hear about a CIA operation, it means it went bad, something went wrong. So when you go through the record of the CIA, you go, oh man, look at all this horrible stuff that happened. But in principle, you never hear about all the things they successfully did, because it's all top secret, right? And when it comes to the Warhammer 40,000 thing, I mean, the Ordo Malleus, for example, I mean, they're the thin blue line between humanity and hell. They're the ones who know how to tell when a chaos incursion is going to happen. They're the ones rounding up the rogue psychers before they unleash warp gates. They're the ones dealing with alpha plus level psychers. Like, so I don't agree that they're the problem. I do think that you have to ask yourself, how could they possibly be reformed to be the most effective? And it's really kind of an impossible task, because in a world where anyone can be a heretic and no one can be trusted, and the threats are of existential, more than existential. Like, existential doesn't even begin to describe it. That's what sets the Warhammer universe apart from other universes. In other universes, the worst thing that can happen is like, oh, the world will be destroyed or everyone will die. In Warhammer 40,000, people wish for death. Death would be like a happy ending, right? Because in reality, people go to hell. And in reality, it's even worse than hell, what they go into, like, even worse than the Christian concept of hell. Because the Christian concept of hell is just like a lake of fire where you burn. But that would be like day one of Slanesh's hell. That'd be the welcoming room of hell, where you know what I mean? Not even close to as bad as it could be.
Yeah, and that would explain why the Emperor didn't even explain the full truth of the warp to his Primarchs. Because, I mean, I would do it because I would fear that they would get corrupted or would do something, something like that.
Well, this is something that frustrates me about the Warhammer 40,000 timeline, but needs to be talked about, and I understand why. Because, like, the glory and the magnificence of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline is how absurdly dark it is, and that's its whole tagline, right? In the grim darkness of the far future, right? And the term is GrimDark, which is like everything is not only grim but also dark. It's like double dark. It's horrible and it's fucking terrible too, right? It's intended to be as awful as possible. But the thing that redeems it is like the spirit of humanity, the heroism of defiance, the last stand, the glorious refusal to submit. But the thing is, in order to create such a dark universe in a world where a godlike being exists, kind of required some kind of ridiculous things to happen that don't actually make any sense. And basically everything in the Warhammer 40,000 universe being as effed up as it is all because of the God Emperor making decisions that I, as a modern human, feel like I could honestly have done better in every case, right? So it's like a lot of his decisions seem almost ridiculously silly to me, but I understand why he had to make ridiculously silly decisions, because it wouldn't be much of a story if it was like, and then the God Emperor unified humanity and he did the Great Crusade and he was so smart, he did everything perfect, so humanity killed all the aliens and then everything was happily ever after. Then there'd be no story. You know what I mean? And so the God Emperor had to make a whole series of kind of ridiculously bad decisions And one of the most obvious ones was not informing his Primarchs or like about the threat of chaos, because that'd be like having a CIA or cops and not telling them that cartels exist, right? It's like, well, how
Or
are you going to?
training them. Yeah, or training them.
Yeah, you're not training them. You're not you're putting them out there like lambs to the slaughter without even informing them of the kind of threats that you need them to fight against. It makes no sense. And the other one's like, this is like a whole podcast. Like with Warhammer, we'd have to make a whole series, and this is a series. I think we've done this will be like our 5th episode. We don't even scratch the surface, but I've boiled it down. There's only 2 Primarchs who caused the whole Horus heresy, and it's essentially Magnus the Red and Lurgar Aurelian. And the ridiculous part is those were the Emperor's 2 most loyal sons, essentially. Lurgar worshipped the Emperor, literally, like loved him and worshipped him as God. And the Emperor is like, I will destroy your city, Monarchia, and humiliate you in front of everybody and like burn everything you did to the ground, which literally forced Lurgar into the arms of chaos by rejecting his loyalty, right? And then in the same regard, not Zinch, but Magnus absolutely was loyal to the Emperor and was just trying to warn him, right? And then he's same thing. He's like, I'll go destroy Prospero. And again, that was like some trick that Horus played. But basically, both Lurgar and Magnus got completely humiliated and destroyed by the Emperor when they were both loyal. And if those 2 things hadn't happened, then there wouldn't be this rebellion. And also, they collectively, those 2, had the keys to the problem. So Magnus was the greatest psychic and sorcerer that ever lived. And so if the Emperor had just been like, hey, Magnus, you're in charge of like understanding chaos and figuring out how to like use it against itself, or how to like make sure we use it safely, or how to make sure people can master the warp, then that would have worked. And that's what ended up happening anyway with the Librarius, right? But initially the Emperor banned psychics, which then that ended up being a mistake, right? Then they were like, nope, that was a mistake. We need psychics. They brought back the Librarius, and then the same thing, the Emperor banned the worship of him as God, but in the end, that's the only thing that protects humanity. That's their greatest power, their faith. So the Emperor mysteriously didn't understand that he was going to need psychic powers, and didn't understand that he was going to need faith, when literally those were like the 2 most important things. So it doesn't make any sense when you think about it.
Well, I think it goes to show you that the Emperor, even with his quote unquote godhood status, he's still a man. Like, he's still mortal.
Well, that is
Even
kind of a big, not really.
even though he's emperor, like he would still share like mortal aspects. Like, he's not like like I wouldn't say he's a Zeus.
Well, so here's the thing. It's like, so what is the Emperor is a big question mark. And I mean, I accept him as God, because that's like the orthodoxy, that's the truth of the matter. But in reality, he's a nascent God. He's a God who is not yet fully manifested as a God, right?
Right? I mean,
And,
well, he was human once, in the distant past. And I mean, it's not that far ago. It's like 10,000 years is, I guess, a long time to us, but what's 10,000 years in the 40K universe?
right. But the thing is, yes, technically he's human, but he's a very specific kind of human called a perpetual. And
Oh,
perpetual,
yeah, that's right. That's true.
yeah, so you can't call him mortal. He's absolutely not mortal. He is by definition immortal. He's what's called a perpetual. And so perpetuals are people who, they never die of age. They are physically immortal, but they can be killed. So they're never going to die of age. They're never going to die of disease. So if you just put one in a cave with, I don't even know if they need food and water, probably not. But say you put them in a cave with food and water, they would live forever. They would never die. But they can be killed, right? So if you threw one into like a lava flow, they would die, technically. But they're perpetual, so even if they do die after a relatively short period of time, their souls will reincarnate. So the soul will come back. So even if the body won't die, and then even if it does die, they'll reincarnate. So you can't get rid of a perpetual. But there's an asterisk on that. So, for example, the sword that Rabot Guilliman wields, which is the Emperor's sword, it causes true death. So even if you're a greater demon, even if you're a perpetual, if you get hit by that sword, you're donezo, right? Just like Horus was donezo. Like even his soul was destroyed. He can't be reincarnated by any means. And the Emperor's sword has that effect.
Yeah,
But
they effed him up, bro. They effed him up real bad.
which honestly is not even fair, right? Because that's the easy way out. Like Horus got an easy way out because if he had died and not been annihilated in that way, he would have been tortured by the chaos gods, right? Because that's what the chaos gods do. If you fail them, they torture you, they torment you, right? They put you in the palace of torments. And like, even if you're like one of their greatest minions, like even a greater demon, like even if a greater demon of Slanesh, who is his most favored creatures that are made out of his own essence in his own image, if they fail to do what Slanesh tells them to do, then they go to like the Palace of Torments and get like tormented for like 10,000 years or 1,000 years before Slanesh like lets them come back and try again. So Horus getting like annihilated by the Emperor is totally unfair because Horus himself can find like millions of people to eternal torment, and yet he himself just got like a clean death, which like they don't give to anybody in that universe, right? Going to the Drukhari torture pits or the hell of Slanesh is infinitely worse than true death, right? Which is just kind of like an injustice when you think about it. But obviously the reason is because he didn't want Horus to come back and cause shit again in the future, which makes sense. But it's really, he got off easy when you think about it.
And the Chaos Gods are very, very unforgiving. I will add that. Like, very unforgiving. Like, it's as you said, bro. Even the chosen champions and the demon princes and even the greater demons, they still get effed at the end. Like, it's just not a good bargain.
Well, chaos is the worst of all bargains, right? It's the worst possible choice you can make to serve chaos because, 99.999999999% of people who go to chaos just damn their souls and damn themselves to eternal torment and eternal hell. And even in life, they're going to get mutated. They're going to be hunted by the Inquisition. They're going to be burned alive or tortured by the Inquisition. And even if they avoid that, they're going to be mutated. They're going to be turned into chaos spawn, squiggling atrocity monsters. And even if they die, even if they accomplish an incredible amount, they're still just going to go to hell and be tortured by their own masters or eaten. Their souls are going to be eaten. Now, true, there's like a minuscule fraction, like 0.0000001% who become demon princes, and then they become like little demigods, and they get their own little domain and their own planet where their will is absolute. But even then, they're still slaves, utter slaves to chaos. Even the demon princes are slaves to chaos, never their master. Right? You have no free will. Like you're just a slave no matter what. Slaves all the way from the bottom to the top. So it's a ridiculous bargain. Whereas if you're just an Imperial Guardsman, your life sucks. You eat corpse starch and you have a shitty las gun and a shitty flak rifle and you die in your billions. But all you got to do is fight, serve, and die. And it's easy, relatively, compared to what Chaos has to do. And as long as you don't betray the Emperor, it doesn't matter if you're just a humble mechanic or farmer or Imperial Guardsman. As long as you die loyal, the Emperor protects. And now this is not totally confirmed, but I believe it is confirmed. Like, if you die loyal to the Emperor and you give up your life for him, he protects your soul when you enter the warp. So if you go into the warp as a human being and you die and you're unprotected, your soul is just food. It's like, when they throw like chum in the water for the sharks and all the sharks just eat it all. That's basically what it's like dying without the protection of the Emperor. You're just like a person being thrown into the ocean full of sharks. You're just going to be eaten instantly by the sharks. But if you die serving the Emperor, he protects you. He brings you into himself and he preserves your soul in the Astronomicon. So the Astronomicon is this like field of light that's emitting from the Emperor's spiritual light. And basically that, in my opinion, the souls of the dead who are preserved in that Astronomicon where the warp entities can't get at them. So he claims those who serve him into that light. So it's always better to stay loyal to the Big E, to the Emperor. I don't call him the Big E. I call him God, Emperor of Mankind. But, and I have a theory too, like it's already been proven, like he can resurrect his favorite champions. So like Saint Celestine comes back to life every time she dies because the God Emperor keeps resurrecting her, which means her soul is preserved. And the Legion of the Damned is another example where it's like one of the most likely theories is they're literally the ghosts of dead space marines, you know. And so I have a theory that like in the future when the God Emperor fully manifests, you know, just like a chaos incursion where there's warp storms and demons spill out from Tzeentch or Khorne's domain, there's going to be a holy warp storm where all these Legion of the Damned type heroes that died in the Imperium are going to come back out of the Emperor's domain and be able to fight again in material space, but now they're going to be transfigured into like even more powerful than they were when they were alive. And I'll just fall on that. I don't know if you follow the Age of Sigmar thing, and I don't really, but this is essentially what the Stormcast Eternals are, right? They are literally mortal champions who were saved from death and reforged into like angelic beings, and then they come back to life every time they die. And so I think like the Stormcast Eternals could easily cross over into the Warhammer 40,000 universe, at least in the concept, which is like all these heroes over 10,000 years who died serving the Emperor, their souls are actually preserved in the Astronomicon. The Emperor can then reforge them into like demons of his own orderly kingdom and then send them back out to fight. So like the Stormcast Eternals are pretty cool looking in terms of their aesthetic, and their concept fits perfectly into Warhammer 40,000, and even their iconography, the twin-tailed comet that they have is literally one of the Emperor's symbols. You know, the two lightning bolts, that's what the Emperor's eagle holds in his talons. And even if it's not the Stormcast Eternals, the Legion of the Damned is sort of the same concept. Like they are like revenants, like righteous ghosts of Imperial heroes. And they're essentially demons of the Emperor, right? Just like every demon of Slaanesh is like a little piece of Slaanesh's will made manifest. Well, that's what the Legion of the Damned are. And that the existence of the Legion of the Damned are like my favorite. I hope they become like a full faction in the future, playable faction. You know, they prove that the God Emperor is an actual god now because he has demons, right? And if he has demons, then he's as much of a god as Khorne or Tzeentch or Slaanesh are, you know?
And a good example of the double-headed eagle in chaos terms is Tzeentch. Kairos Fate Weaver. I know this is jumping out of 40K into Warhammer, but that's just one example. And personally, I don't think Chaos played all their cards. Like, even though the Great Rift failed, and I don't think they calculated the Tyranids coming out of dark space and showing up in the Milky Way, or the Necrons waking up. I don't think they calculated any of that. But what's his face? Kaldor Drago. He's also been seen multiple times, and he's not really officially back yet. Because you remember when the Imperium is in its darkest hour, he will show up. So I don't think we're there yet. Like, although things are really good, and Guilliman has established order, and he put. I'll go so far to say that he put the Inquisition and everyone else back in their place. Like, he reminded them what the original goal was. And it's like, how can you argue with him? Because he literally got the orders from Big E. So it's like, I'm personally myself, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to argue with God's commandments or anything like that.
Well, exactly. And it's like, that's why no matter how bad things look, they've never been better because all they really needed, it was just a crisis of leadership. The reason the empire was crumbling was because it was stagnant, because it was created by godlike beings, but then handed over to mere mortals without the guidance of the godlike beings. As soon as that one Primarch came back, especially the best of all Primarchs, the best at organizing, the best at logistics, the best at leadership, that just revitalizes the whole carcass of the Imperium. And again, I really hope you'll agree to do this as like an ongoing podcast because there's just so many trails that we have to go down. Kairos Fate Weaver, Tzeentch, the other Primarchs like coming back and all these things. And one
could
thing
be tied with humanity's progress.
Pardon me?
How Tzeentch could be tied with humanity's progress, and how Big E might know this and how he might even have a strategy to deal with it.
Well, right. I mean, that's as far as I know, it's my own theory. I can't believe that nobody else has thought of it though. But
Well, I
like,
think it's a brilliant theory because honestly, it's something that Zinch would do.
right. Well, and the idea is like order and chaos are two sides of the same coin and they need each other, right? So there's a
And if he
base
gets
next.
rid of the other chaos gods, then that's two birds with one stone because
Exactly.
that's more power for Zinch, even though he's given more power to the Imperium.
That's right. So if you have one cake, but as you know, there's two domains. There's the materium and the immaterium, and the chaos gods are primarily concerned with what's called the war in the warp or the great game. So they don't really. It's not really chaos versus order. It's chaos versus chaos versus chaos versus chaos, and occasionally they take like a little break to fight order, almost for shits and giggles. But really, what they care about is the warp. And so Zinch is the master planner. So for him to be like, "Hey, Emperor, I really don't like these Nurgle and Khorne and Slanesh dickbags trying to take part of the warp, and I don't really care about material space that much. So why don't I help you out and you help me out, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll betray, not even betray because I'm in open warfare with them, the other three chaos gods, and in exchange, I'm going to help you restore order in your domain because I need, if I'm Zinj, I need you to have a deck of cards so that I can keep shuffling the deck. If they ever take your cards and throw them in the toilet, my little game is over. So anytime they're about to win, I'm gonna just move a little card and switch the hand up so that you never actually lose, right? And then at the end of the day, yeah, I'll sell. Imagine the prisoner's dilemma, right? It's like you got four criminals, they're all evil sociopathic criminals. They're going to snitch on each other at the moment's notice, right? If the police is like, hey, inform on the other ones, Zinch is going to snitch on the other. He doesn't care. He wants to get rid of them. That serves his interests. So it's like, and then on the other hand, the Big E, like I can tell you this as a leader, you need legitimate enemies in order to create a community. You need to unify against legitimate enemies, right? Not fake enemies, real enemies, like people that are actually evil, justify good, right? There is no good without evil. There is no order without chaos. There is no need for an Imperium if there isn't an archenemy. But you don't want an archenemy that's going to actually overcome you. You want dragons to slay, right? You want bandits to catch, right? If you're a samurai, what's your purpose if there's no bandits? You got to protect the rice farmers from the bandits. As soon as there's no bandits, what's your job, right? And so order and chaos are literally two sides of the same coin. And then you look, what is the emperor's symbol? The two-headed eagle. He wears it right on his chest, on all the symbols. The imperial aquila is the symbol of the empire. Well, yeah, what are those two heads? Order and chaos. Two heads or two wings, one bird. You can't fly with only one wing. You need both. And like I said about my real wife, whatever, she zigs, I zag, right? So we're coordinating under the illusion of adversity. Like it looks like we're running from each other or fighting with each other, but in reality, it's all an orchestrated dance. And yeah, there's plenty of territory for both of us to grow because the whole domain of Nurgle, the whole domain of Slanesh, the whole domain of Khorne is all up for grabs, right? So if we
Oh
divide
yeah.
this, yeah, if we divide this cake between the two of us, but we cut out three other people, we both have a bigger piece of the pie.
Well, Nurgle is effed because the Plague Wars failed, and apparently Khorne is like tearing them a new one. So that means Nurgle is losing territory in real space and in the warp.
Yeah, right. And again, you brought up Kairos Fate Weaver, and you said that's like Warhammer Fantasy. To my understanding, he's in both domains. I'm not sure, and in reality, he has to be because that's just the way the warp is. It crosses all boundaries and all genres. So the fantasy and sci-fi universe, people debate like, are they the same universe? Well, yeah, they are because everything is true in the warp, right? Everything, past, present, future, fiction, fantasy, dreams, reality, it's all real in the warp. So by definition, the whole Warhammer Fantasy universe has to exist somewhere within the warp. Has to, just by definition. It's like a multiverse. But Kairos Fate Weaver, right? He's a two-headed eagle or a two-headed bird. And, the way that works is like these greater demons represent the truest nature or manifestation of the being that they represent. They are manifestations of its nature. So the
Yeah,
fact
they
that
are the highest. They are the highest order within chaos.
right. So when you realize that Zinch, when he shows his truest known face, manifests as a two-headed eagle who is blind in one eye, and then literally you look at the picture I posted in general chat, to two-headed eagle, blind on one side. That's Kairos's thing. He can see the past, he can see the future, but he can't see the present. Why is that one eagle hooded? Why is it blinded? It's not blind. It's not missing its eye. It's intentionally covered its eye. And so this is the God Emperor. Like, and again, the fact that Zinch manifests a two-headed eagle as his greater demon, and the Emperor manifests his personal sigil as a two-headed eagle, you'd kind of have to be a little slow to not make that connection. I don't mean to be disrespectful, because apparently nobody else did make that connection, but to me, that's a pretty big nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And then when you realize it's order and chaos, you can imagine the God Emperor and Zinch are sitting at a card game playing a game of Magic, and literally like Nurgle, Khorne, and Slaanesh are kind of like Slaanesh is shooting heroin and getting his dick sucked in the corner. Nurgle is just like sitting in a pile of his own poo, and Khorne is just like
punching the wall in.
yeah, exactly. And Khorne's just bashing his head in the wall, and they're like, "We're all playing the great game," and it's like, yeah, it's really there's only two people playing the game, Zinch and the Emperor, and the other three are not even on the table. They don't even know what the game is, right? So, and there's a thing about like how the God Emperor, in order to make the Primarchs, made some kind of deal with the gods in the warp, and then people go, well, how could that be? Well, maybe he only made a deal with one god in the warp. Maybe he went to Zinch and said, listen, I've been studying this warp thing. Slaanesh is just a degenerate pervert. Khorne's just a bloodthirsty maniac, and Nurgle's just like a feculent bag of crap. But you are the god of knowledge, ambition, change, and magic. Kind of feel like me and you could make a deal, right? And so that is really the only thing that makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, and it works out. It works out for everybody else too. Because the Eldari, they finally get rid of Slaanesh, and then the Tau, they don't have to worry about chaos anymore on the eastern fringes or anything like that. The Tyranids, honestly, they're an outlier right now because we don't know their full strength, so they're basically an anomaly. We've only seen the high fleets from the Tyranids so far, and the destruction that they've caused is like crazy with just 3 high fleets. So there's no telling what is lurking in dark space. So that's also one of the reasons why the Silent King's Aret came back.
Because of what? Sorry, what's the reason he came back?
The Tyranids are the reason why the Silent King came back.
Right.
Because he detected a large, organic, like, I wouldn't call it biomass, but basically biomass. Like an enormous fucking biomass.
Right. Well, and exactly. So the Necrons, they are here to defend their legitimate dynasty, and that's why the Necrons originally in the lore were kind of like this dark force of death and just nihilistic like destruction for its own sake, just these mindless automatons marching on and consuming everything with no real motivation. But then they were fleshed out as like, actually no, they're like the Egyptian dynasties, they're like the original civilization, they kind of are the original order faction, and and so they naturally are allies to the empire because they have the same political structure, they both have dynasties and kings and order and laws and rulers, and they want to defend their territory and blah blah blah. So yeah, it's like in the end, like in Islam, to take it back to real life, I've talked to a lot of Muslims, and they said, in our prophecy, the Christians and the Jews are going to team up for the Battle of Armageddon. They're going to fight on the same side against Satan or whatever. And then he's like, but after that, we're going to turn on each other and fight each other. But at least for a period of time, we're going to be on the same side. And that kind of makes sense. And in the same way, it's like, yeah, the Necrons and the Imperium, if they manage to defeat the Tyranids and Chaos, then eventually they're probably going to turn on definitely they're going to turn on each other and fight. But for the foreseeable future, it's going to be the friend of my enemy is my friend situation, which means there's a long series of hurdles that have to be passed before the Necrons and the Imperium truly throw down, because it would be a complete waste of their energy to fight each other right now. that would be like me and you are in a room with a fucking lion and a tiger and a bear, and we decide to have a fist fight with each other. It would make no sense at all, right? Like,
Yeah. I feel like the Imperium hasn't entered its tribulation period yet. Like it's not there yet. Like it's like they've done a really good job stabilizing it, but I don't think it's quite there yet. And I think Chaos is gonna pull one more trick, and then it's gonna completely fail. Like even though Chaos is extremely powerful, and nobody's been able to mess with Chaos, not even the old gods. Like and they don't mention the old gods anyways, but nobody's been able to really mess up Chaos or go into the warp besides besides Kaldor Drago, but that's a different story. That man's just like a fucking beast of his own, bro. He's just like nothing can mess with him.
Well, brother, it's about 11 o'clock, and I mean, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So all I can say is, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this, and I really hope you'll come. This is your second time talking about Warhammer with me on the podcast, and I really hope you'll come on, as a recurring series, even if it's only like once a month or once every couple weeks or whenever you can manage. But I mean, I could do this every day, and we haven't even, to say the tip of the iceberg, no, we haven't even touched the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. But, I think it's good to break it up into manageable chunks for the audience. And so I'm just wondering if you have any kind of final thoughts, closing thoughts, final prophecies or predictions or observations you want to make as we begin to close it up for tonight.
Personally, I think the Necrons are gonna be the hope for the Imperium. Like the Necrons are gonna be the reason why the Imperium can beat the Tyranids, and I'll leave it at that. And also, I would like to say thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on, and I agree with what you said, and I will simply close by saying the Emperor protects.
God bless.
God bless. Thank you, everybody, and make sure you join the Temple Mount Discord server. Make sure you have subscribed to the official Temple Mount YouTube channel, and keep an eye out for more Warhammer 40,000 content in the future. It's sort of a nice break from the theology and religion and deep conspiracy theory and politics topics we often do. And I know that a lot of you don't see it, but in the end, you're going to realize that Warhammer 40,000 is not fiction. It is history and it is prophecy. And we better make sure that we actually write the timeline a little better, because this should be a massive cautionary tale. It is a cautionary tale for our species, and that's why we have to pay attention to it and take it seriously. Thank you so much, Discord's Watson. Thank you, everybody, for listening and attending. And I guess we'll jump to the Templar Tavern for the rest of the night. If anyone wants to chat, I'll see you guys there. Thanks, Watson. Good night.
And remember, don't take the mark of the beast.
Thank you, Seth. Don't take the mark of the beast. Exactly correct.